When the Earth got formed, it was leftover stuff and all the planets. We had the formation of the sun first, about 4.5 billion years ago. Once the sun was formed, it was happy and it coalesced into a certain size and it ignited. It became a fiery ball of energy, essentially a nuclear compression fusion process going on. And it had leftover stuff. And all the stuff that was left over was sort of spaced out away from it. And the sun had a motion to it. It was rotating, just like Galileo had tried to show the Catholic Church that the sun does turn on its axis. And this stuff that was left over was turning with it. And those became our planets. As they cooled down over long periods of time, we ended up with planets. And today we have a very neat array of planets. We have hard, rocky planets like the Earth, and we have huge gas giants. And there's a great difference between the two of them. So it gives us a wonderful laboratory to say which of these can support life and which ones cannot. So can they all be Earth-like? Absolutely not. It is not simple. But we have been given a great sampling. You know, however we ended up, we've got a laboratory out here that really makes it easy for us to assess what types of planets can support life. We have 4 rocky hard planets like the Earth and Venus, Mercury, and Mars, and then we've got these huge gas planets. The gas planets, most of them you can't even step onto. There's no surface. It doesn't mean to say that something's not swimming around in these noxious gases, but the likelihood of life like we're looking for is not going to be there. Where would you find life among those planets in our sampling? Goldilocks is the only one that knows for sure. You got way too hot porridge. You got way too cold porridge. And then you've got porridge that's just right. And that porridge that's just right is exactly where Earth wants to be. Just like Goldilocks wanted the porridge that she could eat. We're in the Goldilocks zone, a place that's just far enough from the sun to have warmth, but not so warm that life is inhibited, and not so far away as to be so cold that life is inhibited. It is a very narrow zone that exists around every star that could have a planet. A good example of the Goldilocks zone in work is the 2 planets, Earth and Venus. They're sister planets. They're the same size. They had all the same processes going on after they evolved. They had volcanic actions which made enormously thick atmospheres. Earth lost most of it. Venus kept most of its. The only difference between the 2 worlds is that Venus is closer to the sun than the Earth. Venus has enough water locked up in its atmosphere because of just simply the heat from a radiation of the surface of the planet to where it can never rain. It's too hot. The infrared heat coming from the sun just pushing outward constantly on the atmosphere, and gravity trying to hold that atmosphere in is prohibiting any rain from ever falling on the planet Venus. It would have oceans if it could rain, but it can't rain because it will never be cool enough. Earth, on the other hand, is in a perfect place, 93 million miles from the sun. If we were 1 million miles closer or 1 million miles further away than we are, we would have life, but it would be different. It would be entirely different than you and I tonight. How it would be different, we really don't know. We don't really want to know. But that's how delicate this planet is. Now, left alone, this planet can sustain itself and sustain any life that develops on it as long as nature will let it. But once you begin to intrude on it, and the only intruding creature that we have on the planet Earth at this particular time is a 2-legged one. Once you begin to intrude on it, nature's not the only force that acts on the planet. If you took, what is the most obvious thing you see in this picture on the Earth?
Lights.
The most obvious. First thing that strikes you. Somebody said ice. I mean, the white, bright ice. That should be the most striking thing. We're looking at the North Pole, which is actually pretty small. If this was turned around and you were looking at the South Pole, it would definitely be the most outstanding thing that you see. A good example of how delicate our planet is that it's one of these did you know moments. Did you know that 12% of all the sunlight that the Earth receives is reflected by the 2 polar caps we've got? Most of it from the South Polar Cap. Now that may not seem like a lot, but let's look at it from a different standpoint. Let's just suppose that our polar caps melted They glaciated away and the ice melted in the oceans. Of course, the oceans are going to rise, but that means that 12% more sunlight is going to actually be absorbed into the surfaces and the waters of the earth. That would make the average temperature of the Earth's oceans rise, and we would have more evaporative content, our cloud cover would increase, and we would end up essentially a planet very much like Venus. The smallest thing can interrupt the natural cycle of a planet from what it's intended to be. And oddly enough, in addition to Earth and Venus, the planet Mars is also in the Goldilocks zone, right on the outside edge of it. It's almost too cold, but not quite. That porridge is edible. And it had volcanoes just like the Earth did in its early formative stages. And so they had a tremendous amount of outgassing from those 4 volcanoes that you see right there about 500 million years ago. And Mars had a tremendously dense atmosphere. So much that it was filled with the same stuff we have on Earth. Eventually they had nitrogen, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and a few other things, a lot of it common to Earth. It had so much of this stuff that it literally rained on Mars. We see evidence of chasms, canyons, craters, and riverbeds that once flowed with water on the planet Mars. But all that water's gone. We had lakes, massive lakes, shallow seas on Mars, and all that water's gone. Where did it go? Was it there long enough? And this is the question we really don't know. Was it there long enough for some type of primitive organism to perhaps get started somehow on Mars? Very unlikely, and you'll see why in just a minute. So where did the water go? Well, I learned last week that NASA had appropriated almost $7 million to a private company to come up with some concept as to where the water on Mars went. And I was rather astonished because one of the things that I worked on in 1975 was some of the data coming back from the Viking spaceship that was heading to Mars. We knew in 1975 what happened to the water on Mars. It evaporated. Mars is not big enough to hold an atmosphere. Mars is 1/10 the size of the Earth, which means that it just doesn't have enough gravity to hold any sort, no matter how dense, of an atmosphere. Over a very short period of time, any atmosphere would evaporate into space. It's just simply not big enough. It doesn't have any magnetic field because there wasn't ever enough internal heat built up on Mars to have a molten core. So it's a little bit different world, but it probably never had life. But we have established one planet in the Goldilocks zone. We're eliminating our odds down to the 5%. So what geology took place on Earth to make it like it is today? This is the short version. Accretion is the first step. This is back 4.5 billion years ago when the sun was being formed. While the planets were being formed, there was a whole lot of stuff left over from the sun. And basically all that happened is that these bodies were being impacted by large asteroids, comets, meteors, just leftover junk material in space that the gravity began to accumulate as it got larger and larger. We still get a few things like this. We get asteroids and comets and meteors that hit the Earth occasionally. But way back when, it happened all the time. And this accretion process literally built the Earth into what it is today. After the accretion process, the Earth was no longer being bombarded. The activity wasn't from the outside, but it had been slammed so many times that thermal energy within, almost potential energy within the body of the planet itself had grown so greatly that there was a tremendous amount of thermal energy that was just literally roaring to get out. And this heat that was coming out of the oceans and out of the lands caused tremendous storms, lightning for lack of a better word, but the bombardment had stopped. And very shortly after that, the outgassing, the volcanoes, the thermal venting, all of this began to cease as well. And the Earth began to actually get into an equilibrium state to where it was balanced both on the outside and the inside. And then the last phase of the Earth forming was a harmony phase where the Earth's oceans, the land, and the atmosphere were somewhat in a balance. So now we've established the geology about how this planet got here. And it had to take place just like that to be in the 5%. So now we need an atmosphere. The way we have it right now, the Earth's atmosphere is perfect, unless we screw it up, Once again, just like the polar cap, if we mess with Mother Nature too much, we're going to end up eventually saying, we really need help here. The atmosphere is not perfect. But right now, we've got a perfect blend of nitrogen, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and a few rare elements that kind of help us along the way. The way the atmosphere works today to maintain stability, it lets just the right amount of sunlight in. It captures it in the atmosphere through a UV radiation, ultraviolet radiation coming in from the heat of the sun. It passes through the clouds. When it hits the ground, some of it's absorbed, and what's re-radiated is a lazy wavelength in infrared, a much slower wavelength, and it's harder for those wavelengths to get out, so we capture just enough of that heat to make it comfortable for planet Earth. But it hasn't always been this way. Back in that transition phase that I talked about, we ended up with a whole lot of very, very hostile components in our atmosphere. We didn't have a nice blend of nitrogen, oxygen, and carbon dioxide. We had poisons. We had acids. It was all coming from all of this thermal activity that was locked up underground from all the bombardment that we had experienced. But the transition period changed that. It was trying to eliminate a lot of the poisonous gases, but it took a long, long time. An interesting aspect of this is that if we had the Earth just like it is today, back when we were trying to have life form on our planet, which was, about 1 billion years ago is when the first life started. If we had this atmosphere you're looking at right now, life would be impossible. It couldn't happen. This life, anything trying to be alive at that time, would have gagged and never gotten started. So think about that for just a minute. Kind of put that in your pipe and hold it for a second. So now we've got an atmosphere where we've eliminated more odds and we're down closer to our 5%. Now we've got an atmosphere, we're ready for some type of biology to actually be created. How does that happen? Well, we call it the primordial soup. Remember all those compounds that I told you about, the poisons and the noxious gases? Almost 100 years ago, a Russian scientist decided that those elements, if you collected them and perhaps exposed them to enough energy, they might actually create organic molecules. Organic molecules like proteins and amino acids, that's what makes us. Essentially, those are our building blocks. And this idea was kind of tossed around and laughed at a little bit. Some people took it very seriously, but nothing was done about it for many, many years. He visualized that the superheated oceans from the volcanoes and the heat of the Earth, in combination with all the lightning from that transition stage that was in the atmosphere, would take all these primitive compounds that were in the air and somehow electrify them, energize them, and turn them into a primordial goo. Okay? And remembering what we had here, almost 70 years later, a couple of scientists decided they were going to try it. And so they put together an experiment in a laboratory, and they said, let's simulate what the atmosphere was like 3.5 billion years ago, and we're going to take all these components that we know was in the atmosphere at that particular period of time, we're going to put it into a big cubicle, and we're going to just zap the heck out of it. Not continuously, but just like lightning. We were going to bolt it, and then we were going to fire another bolt into it. And we were going to keep doing this until we ended up with a goo at the bottom of our test tube. And it worked. They actually came up with very, very primitive proteins and heavier organic, non-living compounds. And we ended up with, indeed, the primordial soup. Now, this is something that I've studied for many years of my life, are the microspheres. This is one of the most incredible, how come, I think that there ever is, and I think you'll agree with me after you hear some of the facts. Microspheres are the things that are actually made in Oparin's experiment. They're organic peptide amino acid type of non-living organic molecules. The virus on the right is a living entity. It has life. How do we define life? It has the ability to replicate. It can take and it will just say, I'm going to